Hello. Can we okay? Cool. Hello everyone, my name is Mike. I work as the head of software development at Tesco Technology, and I want to talk to you today about redefining seniority. And I've got 45 minutes slot. I like to engage in the conversation, but I've got a lot of talking to get through. So I'm going to leave like 5-10 minutes at the end for all the Q&A, and more than happy to get into conversations, but now I'm just going to power through the thing. So I want to start with telling you a little bit. Is there an echo or is it just me? No, that's just me. Okay. So I started in IT almost 20 years ago. I wouldn't call it a career at the time. It was my first programming job. And seniority back then used to mean how well you could code, how proficient of a problem solver you were, how many technologies you know, to what level, how code ninja you were, right? How much of a code ninja you were. And that was a very clear-cut scale, right? That was meritocracy, how good you were at the technical aspect of your job, because that was the job. Along with that came the old school hierarchy of management, right? Because IT in Poland in the early 2000s was a brand new thing. Like I left my hometown, there were 3 programming jobs in the whole city, right? So when I came to Krakow and started getting into, obviously first into the smaller companies, the business side of IT was old school. And what I mean by that, it was led by business. So the hierarchy that was put on top of the meritocracy was business-driven, it had business values, and our layer of meritocracy was just at the development level, at the programmer level, right? So the tech side of the business. Now, as time passed, that has changed, right? With the influx of external capital, huge corporations coming in, software houses opening up, the scale shifted. And it didn't shift just a little, it shifted a lot. My first job was at a 6-7 person company. My current job, just in my department, is 1,000 people, right? That's a logarithmical increase in scale. So what I'm going to talk about today applies to that scale, because I know startups, small companies, the hierarchies are much simpler. A lot of the issues I'm going to talk about don't apply in that context, because startups mostly are still, for the most part, a meritocracy, right? That's where the tech matters the most. Not alone, but I think it's like 90% of the job, right? So in the context of the scale of large companies, large corporations, large ecosystems and environments, when technology became a business support function, it's no longer just about how well you can code, right? It's not just about the internal drive. And I'm not picking at anyone. I used to be exactly the same way, right? When I started, it was about, I want to learn, what tech can I use, what the project is, and I used to job hop like crazy, right? It was almost every year different programming job, because I wanted to learn. And that tech driver was what pushed me forward, right? So I'm not nagging on anyone, I'm not bagging on anyone. It's part of the growth, right? But when I started getting into the larger scale and the bigger organizations, I realized that that's not enough, right? Because while at the technological level, the problems are logical, abstract, you can solve them through sheer technical expertise, right? But when you come into environments where the problem statements aren't just technological, technology isn't enough to properly solve them. That's why, hello, sit down. That's why when I think about seniority of the context of that scale, of that sheer volume of an organization and the problems that come along with it, I think about also the non-tech aspect of it, the business aspect of it, the people aspect of it. So what I really want to focus on today is redefining what it means to be a senior, what the seniority means in that context. So, said multiple times, tech isn't enough. So what is enough, right? What does being a senior in a large-scale organization, a corporation, even a large software house, right? What does it mean? And my personal reflection from having done, not to overestimate, but hundreds of interviews over the last 2 years, I started seeing a pattern between all the candidates that I spoke to, from a junior dev or an intern level towards regular mids, towards seniors, towards people who, you know, quote unquote, been everywhere, seen everything. And obviously the meritocracy was still there. You could still grade people, you could still see how far the people have progressed on the meritocracy scale. How good of a coder, of a programmer, of a problem solver they were, right? But then I started noticing other things that I maybe not necessarily would have noticed on a purely technical interview, right? So I was doing a lot of what we call leadership interviews. And throughout tens and dozens and hundreds of those interviews, I realized that when I started talking about our day-to-day lives at Tesco, at a large-scale organization, a different, the meritocracy became a matrix of values, of behaviors, right? And I'll talk at the end on how that maps specifically at Tesco, at policy and behavior level, like how we try and foster that culture. But I think in the abstract, it applies to common sense, right? Because when you think about what a professional developer that can operate at scale is, you think about, I'm going to read this and then I'm going to expand. Collaboration, empathy, responsiveness, resilience, and innovation, right? And what that means to me is, I look at people at how well do they handle communication and teamwork. Can they function in an environment when it's not just about the tech? Can they align to the business goals, the actual requirements, right, of the large-scale organization, not just the tech? We look at how proactive they are. Do they take ownership within their domains, within their projects, of the issues that they face, not just on tech, but process-wise, organization-wise, right? We look at their internal drive towards what we would call good, right? Quality. Because you can force someone to follow processes, you can force someone to follow standards and guidelines. But that doesn't, the ability to follow that doesn't actually mean that they internally value those aspects of working in IT, right? Because going at the granular level, right? You all know, like, peer-reviewed requests, pull requests, and code standards, and you can have a discussion about all the nitty-gritty granular level of details, but unless you want to be a micromanager, which I hardly don't recommend and I don't enjoy and I try and not do myself, you need to foster a culture with that where those values are going to be inherent, right? And how do you do that? If you follow a meritocracy, just a purely merit-driven approach, right? If you just focus on tech, you might as well toss a coin, in my opinion, right? Because you might hire some good people or good overall well-rounded professionals, and you might hire a rock star that's going to blow up your whole team, right? And your whole flow. So when you think about what that means altogether for seniority on that multi-vector matrix of personal development, personal growth. And you have meritocracy, you have the internal values that the person represents and how they are driven towards achieving those. You come out with a set of behaviors, right? That you screen for, that you look for. And what we try and do, and what I try and do, is shift towards doing behavioral interviews, right? So the interviews that I do when screening for seniority, when trying to assess what a senior actually is, and is that person a senior, how senior is that person is, I don't ask about hypotheticals. I'm not interested in how would you, if I give you this set of circumstances or a hypothetical problem, how would you solve it? I talk to them about where you've been, what you've done, and how you've done it, right? And throughout an hour-long interview, I nitpick in the sense of I nitpick the behaviorals, right? Because you can ask a question and get what you would consider a positive answer or output for that given question. But the how might not be positive, right? You can have a personal conflict in the team. It can get solved into multiple positive ways, right? Maybe you just go get a beer and it's okay. Maybe it ends up with someone moving on. But regardless of the output, how was that output achieved, right? And that's where the non-meritocratic, that's a messed up word. Meritocratic? The non-technical aspects of seniority come in, because, you know, I would expect, going with that example, a junior to say, yeah, I went with it to my team lead, I went with it to my manager, they helped, we talked it through, or they took follow-up actions, it got solved, right? But if someone considers them senior, that answer ain't good enough. That's not what a driven, responsible, ownership-taking senior professional would do, right? They wouldn't see that as somebody else's problem. They would see that as their quote-unquote problem, in the sense that they were part of an organizational culture that they were trying to actively build. And that's where I see the seniority going, right? When I screen candidates or I work with people, that's what I'm looking for, and that's what a senior means to me. It's when, regardless of technical prowess, which is still there, and we still assess that, but regardless of that, just looking at a person as a professional, how do they come into the culture that you're trying to build? Because at a large scale, we all know what a snowball effect is, right? Something that at a team level, you got 10 people and a small issue, you might just live with it. You got 1,000 people, and that small issue snowballs logarithmically, and it might blow up your culture, right? It might blow your timelines, blow your deliveries. People might get frustrated, quit from a single minuscule issue. So how do you make sure, or how do you minimize the chance of that happening, is you make sure that the people, to the largest possible extent, because all in all, how well can you get to know someone in an hour-long interview, right? Or how well can you screen them? But in the largest extent possible, you try and check the behaviors, not just the facts, not just the merit, but the behaviors that motivate them and drive them. And I feel cliche saying things out of policy, right? But I think the behaviors we defined at Tesco translate into common sense again, right? So we're looking for people who can be brave. And being brave means not being afraid to challenge when it's difficult, to drive for positive change, and not shy away from getting involved in building the culture that we all end up working at, right? We're looking for people that can stay curious. And we all know what innovation in technology is, right? We're looking for people who can solve problems in a new, better ways, but also don't shy away from the scale aspect of things, right? So people who can find new ways of solving problems, not just technically, but at an organizational large-scale level. We're looking, and this is one of the most important things, we're looking for people that believe in each other. And it's cliche, right? But when there's this beaten to death, old cliche that I heard when I started in IT, and I hear it to this day, right? In a project, in your job, 3 things check out, right? It's either the people, the money, or the project, right? And I've done my share of painful projects for little money, but what made it bearable were the people. What allowed us to get through the difficult weeks were the people sitting next to me, and we helped each other out. We had each other backed. No one played the blame game. No one pointed the finger like, you messed up. No, because it was about the team effort. And I think the reason it's one of the most critical behaviors that I personally screen for is because of the logarithmical snowball effect that I just mentioned, right? And I'm not bulletproof. Even the last year or 2, I made mistakes, and I've paid for them. And that has only reinforced my conviction that at the point of being called the F word, not the long F word, by the recruitment teams or in the recruitment process, I realized that maybe I wasn't strict even I could have been stricter, right? Because even at the super nitpicky quality gate, I still got a bad apple in a bunch, right? And that convinced me even further that screening people for those that understand that they're not a solo, what used to be called back in early 10s, Code Ninja, when we had all the fancy titles, Happiness Warrior, Code Ninja, etc., right? Maybe some of you are too young to remember that, but there was a period where instead of regular job titles, we had stuff like that. So sure, you need rock stars to solve absolutely hardest, most abstract problems, right? But you need a team that can deliver sustainably over long periods of time to maintain a large-scale organization. And the behaviors that I'm talking about are about how you build that team, how you screen, right? And the last behavior that, it's not that it's less important, but I think that's something that's the most teachable out of all of those is 20-80 or 80-20, depending on which percentage you put there, right? But it's about prioritization. It's about placing your effort where it has the most impact. And that's, again, lines into the seniority aspect, the seniority matrix of candidates, of people, of professionals, where, like I said, I was a junior. I job hopped. I was about, I want to learn. What's the interesting thing? I want to learn this technology. Let me look for a job where I can do it. Perfectly fine. But at a large-scale organization, with the inertia, with the scale, we really need to rationalize where we place that effort. And I'm sure you've all had your share of, this really needs to be refactored, or it would be great if we could rewrite this module, or we could go back and change the tech stack because looking at it after 2 years wasn't the best choice. Those are all valid tech debt legacy issues, right? But if you place them in a context of, if you spend a month or 2 months doing that, what does it bring for the company, for the business? And it might sound like a horrible corporate way of looking at being a programmer, but the only reasons those jobs exist at the scale that we are in is because we deliver that business value. It's because IT has shifted into a business support function. We don't do tech just to do tech. We do tech because it delivers value for the business, right? How am I at time? Because I've been rambling on. 20 minutes, okay, so 10 minutes, okay. So, with that, what was supposed to be a short intro, there's one more aspect I really need 10 minutes to talk about, but I've talked about the meritocracy, the matrix, the new matrix of values, right, that I would consider when assessing someone's seniority. But there is one, I think, overarching complex issue at play here, and that is the culture of IT, the culture that we all are building and that we all work in. And I'm sure literally everyone here had a bad manager. If you haven't, I'm jealous, right? But when I talked in the beginning about how things were 15, 20 years ago, and part of that old school business management aspect was the hierarchy that came along with it. And then as things evolved, or in my view, we started redefining what seniority means, and we got the chance throughout that seniority to put people in leadership, senior, managerial, director roles that were actual programmers, right? And that wasn't the case 10, 15 years ago. That never happened. Your manager was a business person or an MBA with a project management graduate degree, right? And that set the tone for how high up the tech culture could bubble up, right? Because you all are probably painfully aware of the cultural differences between business and tech, the jargon, the language, the communication style, the priorities, right, of what you're trying to get through when you communicate. And when the hierarchies started allowing for tech people to move up, me included, right? I couldn't have had this job 10, 15 years ago. When that allowed, for me, that was a bright light at the end of the tunnel, because that meant, oh, that means we can go beyond just the tech layer of an organization, of a culture, and start bringing that culture, those values, to a wider org, and level by level start influencing the culture that we were working on, right? So all the frustrations that as a programmer I used to have, where my manager didn't understand my 15-minute monologue about a specific aspect of a tech or a bug or a choice, they were like, yeah, how quickly can you do it? How much will it cost, right? It's frustrating and painful to have those conversations over and over again with leaders that don't know what you're talking about. But when that started changing, and when people started getting, the people with technical backgrounds started getting the chance to play a bigger part in creating the culture within IT that we all live with every single day, that started allowing us, for me, I can even speak personally, right, that I've seen my approach to the culture I was in change. Like I said, I was a programmer. My influence extended so little and as far as maybe the team went, right? When I started moving into roles where I had a team, or I was working with people, working with stakeholders, I started realizing, oh, I can actually impact, change the things that were pissing me off for 10, 15 years as a programmer. Amazing. And then when I started recruiting and building teams and moving to a yet new layer of corporate abstraction, right? I realized that, oh, I can only go so far. I'm a single individual, right? I know what good culture looks like in my opinion, but how do I make it work at the scale? Again, doing so in a 10-person team is a one-man job. Doing that at the scale of 100 people, not so much. Doing that at a scale of few hundred people, forget it. So that again brings me back to everything that I've been talking for the 22 minutes before I asked for time, is the only way I, as a quote-unquote senior leader in a corporate IT function, right, can do that is make sure that the values that I cherish and hold dear are reflected in the leaders that I hire. And then make sure that the leaders that I hire, through sharing of those values, hire the next layer of programmers and future leaders with those same values in mind, right? And it's not an easy job. It takes time, and you make mistakes, like I said. But if we agree on what seniority means, what good seniority looks like, and again, in my opinion, the meritocratical aspect of technical savviness, the technical expertise is a given, right? I think that's something that at this point in 2023 is expected, right? If you get someone in your recruitment process and they don't check off the basics, knows Java or whatever tech stack you work at, that's done and dusted, right? So the tech aspect of it are kind of a given. They're still very important. Don't get me wrong. It's not I'm trying to say like, oh yeah, let's just hire all the extroverts and it will fix all the issues. No. What I'm saying is, within the population of tech, we can still try and propagate the values that make good seniors and good professionals in a more well-rounded manner, which will then impact the large-scale culture that we're building. And I had a point at the end of it. And what this talk was for me personally is sharing my shifted perception of what seniority meant to me 10, 15, 20 years ago, what it means to me now, and how I think we should keep evolving and keep impacting positive change in our cohesive culture as an IT sector. And I think how we can accomplish that, right? And we can accomplish that by expanding our expectations from the tech to a well-rounded professional, right? And I think that's going to be more or less time for Q&A, right? Half an hour? I can ramble on for 10 more minutes, but I would really like to answer some questions, because I think the future is in the dialogue. Does anyone wants to ask anything?